Hello, and welcome once again to the Fair Game podcast, We Love You Football. I'm Graham Miller, and in this episode, we're highlighting the situation at Reading Football Club. Now, Fair Game's all about creating a fairer, more sustainable football landscape for all clubs and fans. And Reading, the Royals, well, they're in financial trouble. Their future is in doubt, the crown's wobbling. The club's latest financial accounts for the 2021-22 season shows a pre-tax loss of £17.3 million. The owner, Dai Yongge, who's been in control since 2017, says he's still committed to resolving the problems and is determined to secure external investment to stabilise the club's finances. But in recent months, one prospective buyer, American businessman Rob Kuig, was apparently ready to complete the sale when it all went sour, and that's now in the hands of lawyers. A proud Premier League club just 12 years ago, Reading in recent times has suffered points deductions, fines, and transfer embargoes for failing to fulfil all the club's responsibilities. And this season, they're playing in League One, and their future remains far from certain. So, what can be done? To find out, I'm joined by the MP for Early and Woodley, Yuan Yang, Sarah Turner, Chair of the Reading Supporters Trust, James Earnshaw, the Reading reporter for the Reading Chronicle, and John Mays, who's the Chair of Fair Game. Now, James, you've been on top of this story, the details for, well, more than most of us, that's for sure. What does the immediate future, would you say, what does the future hold for Reading?
Well, afternoon. It's quite a broad and difficult question to answer already, just because there's so much uncertainty. At least in the previous times, there were rumours and talks of interested parties and buyers, but it all seems to have gone pretty quiet in recent weeks. Supporters are concerned about completing the season and more so, I guess, starting the next season. But at the minute, the club's just in a bit of a state of limbo, and as a result, sort of crowds are dropping, and interest in general is kind of plateauing. We're at a bit of a loss, to be honest.
To the general listener, Rob Coig announced himself as the buyer to fans. He was sort of revealed to the club on what happened there. Why didn't that go through?
It depends which side of the fence you listen to. If you listen to Rob Coig's side, it's it was all ready to be done, and we were told within the next 48 hours when he was at the match on the first day of the season. And, he still now says it was only one signature away from being done. But then the club seems to say that he keeps cutting the price, and he was playing a bit of silly buggers. So it depends which side of the fence you listen to, and I'm sure the truth is somewhere in the middle of those two.
Even Yang, it doesn't sound good for the future. How important would you say is the club to the local community, to your constituents?
Reading Football Club is incredibly important to the local community, not just in the fact that the members of staff there are mostly from the local area in Whitley, which is part of my constituency, but also because of the community work that they do and that they do through their community charity. And just from the fact that they're a well-known, well-established, one of the oldest clubs in the country, they've got an extensive fan base that stretches not just over Reading in my own constituency, but all over the surrounding area. So when I knock on doors every week in the constituency, I very frequently come across people who talk to me about my work for Reading Football Club, and it's one of the top issues that they will bring up.
What do they say? What do they fear?
I think the club has been through a lot of turbulence in the last few years, and there's been a lot of uncertainty that all the fans have gone through. And the feeling that I get when I speak to supporters clubs like Sarah's at Star, and others is that people are running out of almost kind of emotional bandwidth for all the drama that is coming with being a Reading fan. And yes, there's the drama of, how many goals and are we going up or down? But that is what you'd expect from football. What you don't expect is not knowing the future of your club, the future of the ownership of the club, the future of its finances. And that's the kind of stuff that I don't think fans should need to worry about. And I think that's actually this kind of stuff that politicians like myself and others in the government should be worrying about so that we can create a sustainable framework for football in this country.
Well, Sarah Turner, is the Supporters Trust in contact with Mr. Young? I mean, what do you make of things?
No, we're not. No, the whole time that Dai Yongge's owned the club, we've never had any contact with him as fans. We've had very limited statements, I think, from him. I have met Dai Yong Pang, who's the CEO, But I think we've met him about 3 times in the whole time he's been there, and we certainly haven't seen Dai Yongge for well over a year.
What do you think his intentions are?
Got no idea. I mean, that is half of the problem, that we don't know what his interest was. When he bought the club, he had been interested in other football clubs, said that he was interested in football. But we don't know what his intentions are. We don't know what he's thinking of. We don't know what the thought process is. We don't know why he's not been funding the club. We don't know whether he lost interest or whether it's financial restrictions that have meant he's been unable. But we don't know. And as fans, that's put you in a really difficult position.
So who is it you talk to at the club?
I talk to a lot of the senior management at the club, so not the CEO, but we speak to the other people that are managing it on a day-to-day basis to try and help them to understand kind of how we feel as fans and to try to support them as staff, because they're in a really difficult position as well. They're in a position where they're working for a CEO who is being led by the owner. The CEO is not at the club, he's based himself elsewhere, and they're trying to follow along with the rules that are being set by above, whether they agree with them or not. They're in a very difficult position.
John Mays, you're the chair of Fair Game. Now, it's the situation at clubs like Reading, which are at the forefront of Fair Game support for the independent regulator. But for example, if Mr. Yongge was to be removed, Reading would still be in trouble, wouldn't they?
And this is part of the problem, Graham, which is that creating a situation is one thing, fixing it once it's happened is another. And we know that, you know, many clubs end up in a position where through whether it's overextending themselves or bad management, you know, bad luck, those kind of things, that they end up in a position where they're on their knees. I mean, you read reports even just this week about Manchester United saying that, you know, when Jim Radcliffe came in, it was a sort of last minute sort of shoring up, and you start to look at the things which he's having to do to address the outgoings, etc. And what you see there is a legacy of certain decisions and ways in which clubs have been run that are then left to the whoever comes next to try and fix those. And if it was big business, businesses would fall away. If it was a high street retailer, we'd all go and shop at the next high street retailer when our favorite one had disappeared and they'd pre-packed it or whatever it might be. The problem with football is you don't choose your club in that way. You don't, if your town or your city loses its club in that way, you can't just resurrect it from nothing. It's, you know, the ripple effect of that, it's not like any other business. And that's why it sort of Fair Game exists, is what it grew out of instances like that, where you go, unlike other businesses, you can't afford them to fail in the way that the economy allows other businesses to fail and grow. Football doesn't work like that.
The fit and proper persons test concluded that Mr. Yongge was, quote, not a suitable custodian to run or own the club. But then an independent panel rejected the EFL's decision. The whole thing comes across as a total mess.
Yes. And the new independent regulator, that's one of the core bits they're going to have to address, which is shoring up that mess, as you describe it, making sure that a test has its clear parameters, it's understood, it covers the things that people expect those to cover, and then when it makes a determination, there's a plan for what to do with that determination, whether it's not to buy a club, fine. More complicated if someone already owns a club, a different matter. But you know, it's definitely underlines the need for robust regulation, a regulator that has some teeth and has a very clear plan for what to do in that scenario. What you've outlined there is the reason that it can't be left to be governed by itself, because it clearly has not worked, particularly in Reading's case.
James, as Sarah was suggesting just now, Mr. Dai argues that the global pandemic, which impacted business in his native China, that was responsible for his financial problems, and that he's now resolved staff payments and the tax man. The suggestion is it's good news.
That's the bare minimum, I guess, is that if you're paying the tax man and paying the staff, which he hasn't, and a lot of the time he hasn't done. We know for a fact that sort of other sources have been used, to pay the staff and pay the wages and pay the bills. So he's not even doing the bare minimum most of the time. We're led to believe he contributed to the last lot of wages, but I mean, even that, an owner contributing to the wages, he should be paying all of it. It's his job as the owner of the football club. So it's all a bit ridiculous, really. And he might full well have had cash flow issues, in which case he should sell up and to sell to someone who does have the funds to run it, not just kind of pick and choose when he does it and hope that the buck falls at somebody else's feet at the times that he can't.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree with James. And I have spoken to potential buyers of the club that I have every reason to believe are credible, and who have spoken to the EFL as well. And I think what we really need now is, as a resolution to this ownership crisis, is essentially for Mr. Dai to sell the club sooner rather than later. As John has said, as Fair Games research has shown, it is not easy being an owner of an EFL club right now. There are many clubs, and there are dozens of clubs across the country that have gone into administration or close to, in the last decade, and that means that there needs to be broader underlying reform of the way that football is regulated in the UK. So certainly, it's not everybody. Not everybody is fit to be an owner, but in the case where it's not the industry for you, I think it's important that you sell up.
That brings us, Joanne, to the Football Governance Bill. Now, it's slowly making its way through Parliament. The worry is we might well get a watered-down version by the time the law is passed. What are you hearing at Westminster?
So the progress of the Football Governance Bill, which our government brought into the Lords last year, just after we were elected into government, that has been disappointingly slow. It has been stuck in the Lords for far too long. And from my perspective as an MP in the Commons, waiting for our chance to get our hands on it in the Commons and debate it and talk about what we need from it, it's not acceptable that Conservative peers in the House of Lords filibuster the legislation. And I think about this in terms of time. Parliamentary time is really precious. Parliamentary time has to be prioritized for things that are really urgent. And simply letting it drag out is actually really, really harmful, particularly in terms of clubs like Reading that need this regulator as soon as possible.
Sarah, what would happen if Mr. Dai fails to make payments again this season?
Well, I mean, that's our risk every month, Graham. That's where we are. Every month we question whether our staff have been paid and whether the HMRC's been paid, which we shouldn't have to do. There's no doubt it's going to happen again. I mean, we are living hand to mouth at the minute. We just can't survive not knowing whether we're going to be able to pay people. We're desperate for somebody to come in and to help to stabilise the situation that we're in.
John, what could be included in the bill, or indeed now, what could be included to stop this Reading situation from happening, from getting worse?
Well, looking back at the sort of root cause of a lot of problems within the football pyramid, it all comes down to money. It all comes down to money. They're not simple businesses to run. It's a whole nation of armchair football fans and armchair chief executives and everything else. It's not an easy business to run because it doesn't run in the same way that, as I mentioned earlier, it doesn't run in the same way that normal businesses run. And the rewards are so high, or to flip it on its head, the lack of reward further down the pyramid is so low by comparison that those gaps at each level of the football pyramid are ever widening. There's the haves, and there's the have-a-lots and the have-nots. And that causes a sort of football ecosystem, which is all based on promotion and having to get further up the pyramid to pay your bills. And the problem with the financial flows in football means that the rewards are very high, but the cost of getting there is very high, and not everybody can get there But so to compete to get there, you have to spend a lot of money. And that is then the problem, because lots of people spend lots of money and don't all get a return for that. And as I say, if it was normal business, that would be cut and thrust of normal business and they would succeed and fail. What you end up with is gambling, essentially, with football clubs. So if the financial flow was better regulated and you saw that distribution more sensible, and it made it a more competitive league and the gaps were closer, then the incentive to go all in, spend beyond your means, etc., falls away a little bit. So that you can still get promoted, and there are still teams which do get promoted, and the shining examples that can always be found of someone who's made it and great, and then they show up their balance sheets and everything else. But without that financial flow being better distributed, you end up going, right, I'm going to gamble lots of money into the club. And if it doesn't pay off, you start sliding down again, as we've seen. And then those liabilities, those costs, those overheads, players, whatever it may be, become hugely unaffordable. And then that spiral goes down, and then you end up with huge clubs who were Premier League clubs. We're talking about one today, that then end up in a position where the money's just run out. And the rewards at that level of the game and the costs to climb that ladder are so impossible to sustain on a normal business level.
And just to add to what John was saying, I don't think we should see football as any other industry, any other market, because football clubs are so important to their local communities and such important community institutions. Even if we did see football as just like any other market, I think any regulator quite quickly would conclude what John has, which is that this market is in a state of crisis, and there is no kind of competitive equilibrium that will bring us a good outcome for clubs and for fans, because of all the race to the bottom incentives that John was describing, and because of the distribution of funds throughout the football pyramid, or should I say the kind of lack of distribution of funds throughout the football pyramid. So I think on both of those counts, I see a really strong argument for there to be a strong regulator that tries to put together the broken pieces of English football. In the last 5 years, there have been 7 clubs that have gone through insolvency or administration across Britain. And that, if you were to apply that to any other industry, especially in any industry that has systemic effects in the community, that would not be acceptable.
I think as fans as well, we've got our sort of part to play in all this, because I think we've learned here at Reading that what we need is sustainability. We need this club to be run within our means, which perhaps we were guilty before of wishing for those Premier League players and everything to be good. So I think as fans and all fans of all clubs, we need to really look at what's happened and realise that we have to live within our means. We cannot expect owners to put in vast amounts of money all the time. We need to make that money. We need to have that through ticket sales, through sponsorship, whatever. But we have a part to play in that as well, rather than just hoping somebody will come in and pay everything. I think Reading will be a very different club. If somebody can come in and stabilise everything as it is, I think we need to really look at what our hopes and dreams are for our football club. And what we want is that community champion. We want something that we can all be proud of within the community, but live within our means.
You'd also want a say, I guess, as fans in what happens next, maybe a seat on the board, something like that. I mean, this is part of all the talk that's going on now. How kind of difference would that make, do you think, Sarah?
I mean, that would be a dream position, wouldn't it? It would be, even if that position was like a protective thing to protect the rights, the colours, where we're playing things like that rather than actual decisions, that would be amazing. But it's just to be listened to would be really good. It would be if the fans' positions would just listen to what we want and have that brought forward and have someone that we can actually communicate with and listen to.
The fans took to the streets. There have been protests. Anything resulted from that?
I mean, not really, apart from the fact we have highlighted what's happened. I think because I'm in a position where I can voice that easier than most fans, I've got people that I can talk to and can access. Other fans just want their way to say what they feel. People are really angry and upset. And as Joanne said, Reading Football Club is really important to us, and people need to have their chance to have their voice heard. And having that kind of protest and march was a way for lots of people to join in, to be seen and heard. So it was really important.
I think the key thing there is voice. People feel fans of Reading feel like they've been ignored and not heard, certainly by the owners of the club. And it is really unsustainable to go from week to week not knowing if your club's going to make it to the next week because you've heard a rumor on social media about invoices owed and so on. The amount, I think, of turmoil in the fan community over these kinds of events is really, really huge. And I think that's not healthy. And so with a football governance bill that can give fans a structured and legal voice in decisions, I think that's part of the solution to giving power back to communities over their local clubs.
James, with all the uncertainty going on, I suppose it's remarkable from an actual football point of view that the club are in the top half of the table.
Yeah, no, there's no nobody's moaning about the football for once, which makes a nice change. But then it's almost just frustrating because you just think just what they could have achieved. Had it been stable in the background, all it would have taken in January is maybe one or two free players just to pad out the squad, and you could be looking at a promotion push. And suddenly you're then getting 20,000 in the stadium rather than 7.5 that we got in the stadium on Tuesday, and everything is ready and is there to be spun around and get that ship sailing back up in the right direction. But without a captain at the helm, then it's kind of floating at the minute.
You talk to the players, are they able to put it out of their mind? Do they discuss it with you?
Yeah, some of them have. Some of them have obviously been deeply frustrated, as we all are. They're kind of as in the dark as we are, and the manager is kind of leading it with two arms tied behind his back. But fair play to them. They're getting their heads down and getting on with it. And who knows? Come the end of the season, we could, despite all the odds, somehow end up right up there.
John, I'll come back to some of those statistics you were talking about. It's nearly 60% of the top 92 clubs are technically insolvent. It means, for example, if Dai Yongge walked away tomorrow, Reading would go bust. It is bizarre to anybody outside of the game that any business can be allowed to continue in this way.
Yeah, and this then comes into your sort of benefactor owners kind of thing. Is we're relying on the industry, the football industry, because that's what most of it is. We've got the sport, the game, and everything else. But then when you're into the management nitty gritty, you're into the people buying clubs for whether it's future costs or whatever it may be. You've got some people who are buying them because it's their club, they love it, and they'll apply their money in. But that distorts the playing field in some ways. But as you say there, if an owner benefactor essentially pulls out, it's critical that a business, and Sarah, you alluded to this, it's critical that business is able to survive a change of ownership. It shouldn't be quite so critical that it is your owner and the size of their pockets or the size of their ambition or the size of their willingness to keep funding it. We know that there are many, many clubs that are funded by, wonderful and very committed owners, and they probably lose a lot of money personally, but it's a passion project or whatever it may be. But some of these are massive passion projects where the money will run out very quickly as you climb it, and that is that's that gambling, in inverted commas, gambling culture going on, which is my club is lucky enough to have a bottomless pocketed fan at the helm, or I've got a venture capitalist fund that's decided to buy it, and what are they going to do with it? And I think that's the really challenging bit, is that you want the business, and if you read the stories about Manchester United this week and talking about some of these rather headline grabbing cuts in the sort of the operational side, not the footballing side, they're saying, well, actually, this is going to make the club sustainable. And again, I'm not in the detail on that one by any stretch of the imagination, but even that concept of large football clubs saying, I want it to be sustainable so that it doesn't rely on XYZ as a way of funding itself. That's what I think is an example of where we need to be, so that those changes in ownership, or a bad season or whatever, it doesn't wipe out a club.
Do you see the regulator, the independent regulator, actually having the ability, the teeth to control that, to make sure that doesn't happen?
That will be your $1 million question. The idea being that the regulator brings in an element of refereeing in some ways, and a sort of creating that, getting the footballing bodies to come up with their financial deal, but trying to ensure that it covers off things which address a fairer financial flow, certain things that maybe come out of a state of the game report about the way fan engagements, things like that, the stuff that people care about, and the extent to which that's in the legislation or in the codes of practice or soft pressure or whatever it may be, that's all sort of still a little bit TBC. But it's that critical thing of going, right, financial deals have to work for all the parties and all the interests as best they possibly can. And that's what's critical.
Do you think some of your fellow politicians on all sides really understand the complexity of all this, and they perhaps just reacting to headline stuff? I mean, just some of the things that have been said in recent days about the regulator, that it shouldn't happen and all the rest of it. Do you think they don't appreciate the fullness of it?
Well, I think, Graham, you're referring quite diplomatically to Kemi Badenoch's comments yesterday, the leader of the Conservative Party's comments yesterday, saying that she thought the idea of a new football regulator was a waste of resource. And I would certainly say I don't think that she understands the full complexity of this. I've successfully applied for a backbench debate on the financial sustainability and governance of football that will be held in March in Parliament. And in order to apply for that debate, I spoke to a large number of course, Labour MPs, but also Lib Dem MPs and Conservative MPs who've been affected by the dysfunction in the football pyramid by their own local clubs. And what I see across the backbenches of all of our parties actually is a common interest in trying to make sure that we can make sure our own clubs can survive to the next season and have sustainable futures ahead of them. I find it really strange, to be completely honest. I find it very strange that Conservative peers in the Lords are slowing down this legislation of the Football Governance Bill and its passage through the Lords, because any delay simply delays the ability of us to do something about the sorry state of English football. And I can understand, I suppose, on an ideological level, that Badenoch wants to have a broadly anti-regulation approach. But then I think what I would ask her, and what I would ask the Conservative Party is, do you think that the situation right now is healthy? And if you think it's not healthy, what are you going to do about it? And I don't really think that perhaps Badenoch has got an answer to that.
But is the government serious in implementing the bill as it stands at the moment?
Absolutely, absolutely. The government and the ministers I've spoken to, the Secretary of State, Lisa Nandy, we're all very keen to see the bill come to the Commons so that we can debate it in the Commons, so we can hopefully pass it in the Commons in due course. But first, it's got to make its way through the Lords, and that's where the delay from the Conservative peers is coming from.
Sarah, do you think you'll have a club this time next year?
Yes, I do. Come on, Graham, we've got to be more positive than that. I mean, we've been
I'm only
through
asking
so
the
much
question.
as Reading fans. We have been through the mill, but we've got to stay positive. That's what keeps us going. It keeps the fight going, because we've got something we want to protect and we want the club to be there. And yes, I think somebody out there will see what a great investment Reading Football Club is. We're in a great location. We've got a great team. We've got no money invested in it. Look how we're playing. We want to be talking about what's going on the pitch, not what's off the pitch. That's all we want. We want to go back to those boring conversations about how rubbish we were at the weekend and not talking about everything else.
And to add to Sarah's point, I know that there are credible buyers out there. I've spoken to them, and Reading is one of the oldest clubs in the country, has a long and proud history and a really strong fan base here as well. So I see no reason that there can't be a good future for Reading football. I think we've talked about all the obstacles to that and all of the challenges that we need to overcome, but this is a club that could have a very good future.
But I suppose it's getting through to Mr. Young to find out, Mr. Dyer, to find out exactly what he wants, what he's trying to do, what he's trying to achieve, what his ambitions are.
Yeah, and I imagine that's changeable, because as the situation goes on, and we think he may have more money troubles, then maybe he will be more open to investment from somebody coming in. That's what we hope for.
John, Reading's plight is at the heart of what Fair Game has been lobbying for some time. Hand on heart, can the bill, can it resolve these type of issues once and for all? Or if it fails, what happens next? I know I'm being pessimistic again, but I'm only asking the questions.
It's not going to fail, Graham. Come on. We'll take Sarah's positivity, optimism. No, that I believe it will pass in some shape or form. I think we've seen it change from its original form into the version going through the Lords. With, we lobbied for a number of amendments and improvements, and had a team of people working on trying to iron those out. I think we've had good engagement on that. Some politicians have been fantastic, as you say. Others have been less enthusiastic. Can it prevent this happening? You can't say it's going to. There's going to be things that happen. Clubs are going to have terrible runs of form, and there will be performance elements of this. What we're trying to do is take away the riskiest elements of this. I'm trying to go, okay, right, there will be challenges if you get relegated. We know that happens. It is a pyramid. You go down the pyramid, the revenues get less, the crowds get less, etc., etc. People will try and do it. But if we can get a sustainable business and a sustainable model and level those out, then as we say, if the football governance bill introduces a regulator who can take steps towards that, it's not going to happen overnight. We know that. There's 92 clubs plus the national leagues and everything else that are already in situations. So a football governance bill tomorrow is not going to fix the plight of Reading Football Club tomorrow. There's lots of stuff happening. You hear so it could be a slow burn for some of those changes to come into place. Clubs may well go before we see this happen. But it's got to be better than it is today. And if it arrests that decline and that sort of separation of the pyramid and crumbling of the pyramid, if you want a view, if it arrests that in the short to medium term, that's a really good start. If it then starts to make it healthier and it recovers and it becomes much stronger, then that's absolutely what we're pushing for. And the bill, there's still plenty to come in once the bill is passed. What powers does the regulator actually have, and codes of practice and things like that? There's sort of secondary legislation. But getting a bill in, getting a regulator set up, getting it funded, and having people moving towards that fairer future and that better financial distribution, and that will then bring all the other sustainable things, environmental, diversity and inclusion, and women's football, all those things that are part and parcel, fan engagement, all the things that come into, for example, the Fair Game Index, all the things we've been touching on the community aspects of a club. Those will flourish if football clubs are less beholden on a certain financial model, and on-pitch success taking priority over all investment choices.
And just to add to what John said, there are a number of measures in the current proposed football governance bill that would have helped Reading and clubs like Reading if it had been in force in law before we got into this situation. One is, of course, a stricter test for owners and directors of clubs to make sure that they will actually be responsible owners and directors. And that test, I think, being applied also retrospectively, if issues come up to the regulator, I think is really, really important. So it's not just a one-off, you were fine in 2017 and you'll always be fine, but that it's kept under review. But secondly, more broadly, the fairer financial distribution that we need across the football pyramid. So it's actually less of a challenge to run clubs all the way down the football pyramid, and to run smaller clubs, and to run clubs that are essentially not Premier League clubs, which I think are some of the ones that are only benefiting from the current arrangement. I think those things would benefit many clubs, and I think they could have stopped Reading from being in the situation that we're in now. But the question now is an issue of time. The longer that there's delay on this legislation, the more risk there is of clubs falling into a situation that we've seen Reading and many other clubs across the country fall into.
James, football is all about the fans. You said a moment ago that the gate at Reading was down to 7,000, 8,000. Do you see that as a protest because the club is doing, well, reasonably well on the pitch? Do you see that as a protest or just people getting totally fed up with the whole thing?
The mixture of both. We know for a fact there's plenty that have said that they're not putting any more money. There's a perception that any money going in sort of through ticket sales goes to the pocket of Dai Young, which it doesn't. It goes to the club, but everyone's entitled to act how they see fit. And if people have had enough, then I don't blame them. I'm not saying if it wasn't for my job, I'm not entirely sure I'd go to every single game as much as I do if I was sort of still traveling every week as a fan. I'm sure there are plenty that are deciding to do this as a protest, and I know many that are staying away until the ownership changes. But ultimately, if you want to see the club at the bottom and see the rebirth and the rise back up to the top.
Well, let's do a round of positivity then. Staying with you, James, talk us through it. I mean, are things as bad as I read and hear and see, or do you see a light at the end of the tunnel somewhere?
Uh, Trying to be positive. I don't personally see a light at the minute. I mean, we're told that there's interest, and for as long as there's interest, there's always some light. I don't think anything seems particularly close down the line yet. But morale seems good within the club, and we seem to find funds from somewhere to keep going month to month. And as long as we do that and get to the end of the season, then it gives us 3 or 4 months to sort something out before the start of next season. I always said to myself that Reading were too big a club to fail, but that's that I'm losing my faith in that with every passing month. But we'll have to see. You got to stay positive, as Sarah said, and I'm sure there's somebody out there somewhere who fancies buying a football club.
Sarah, you've told us you expect Reading still to be breathing this time next year. Tell us about your optimism. What are your next steps, do you think? How do you see the immediate future and indeed the long-term future?
I don't know really. I think we have to keep fighting as fans for our club. We have to keep trying to get Reading in the forefront of the media so that people can see us, they can see what's happening to us. We have to raise the profile, we have to keep shouting, we have to talk to everybody that will listen to see whether we can make a difference, and we just have to hope that something good happens. I think we deserve it. I think we're here ready, and we've just got to stay positive and hoping. There's nothing we can do. We know we've done every process that we could possibly try, we have tried. We have brilliant engagement from Yuan, and other MPs have been absolutely brilliant. They've been really helpful. People like Fair Game have been great. Even though everybody complains about the EFL, they have actually been really helpful. They will always listen and reply. So we're really trying. We just have to keep positive and keep going.
Yuan, is the fate in Westminster's hands? Do you think what happens next is really going to be crucial?
For Reading Football Club, some of the fate is, of course, in the owner's hands, and that's why I think it's so important that he can sell and make a swift sale as soon as possible. But in Westminster, I mean, there are lots of people very much at the top who understand the problems that we're facing and who have an interest in the future of Reading. I mean, I've spoken to the Secretary of State about this. I've spoken to the sports minister. I met the sports minister with a number of our local fans from the supporters clubs here. And they all hear the message loud and clear. We need something to be done, not just about Reading, but about clubs all over the country who are struggling with ownership, struggling with finances. That's a systemic problem. The decision-making power, unfortunately, right now is in the hands of, unfortunately, still a very conservative-dominated House of Lords, and many of them, for various reasons, don't want to see the law progressing, and that's why it's so kind of frustrating, I think, for MPs like myself in the Commons, particularly who want to see progress on this made quickly.
Prime Minister's a football fan. He must have a voice.
Absolutely, but Parliament is also a two-house structure, and legislation has to go through the Lords and to be debated in the Lords. Now, I'd like to see those debates being done in good faith. I would like to see those debates being done in, with an effective use of time. I don't think that's what's happening in the Lords. I think a lot of these debates are being dragged out to postpone its passage, and I think that's actually quite bad faith engagement by those Conservative peers. And if any of them were listening, I would simply say to them, please, can we get on with it?
John, this conversation is what Fair Game is all about, but we feel as if we're at the last gasp saloon, aren't we? I mean, this is sort of where do we go next? Do you remain optimistic?
Yes, I do. Fair Game grew up a few years ago when this wasn't a thing, right? So actually, if you look at where we've got in our very short history, it's a couple of football seasons, and we're now having podcasts and I've got MPs talking about the need to get on with it. It's brilliant. When you look at that level of change in such a short space of time, you've got to sort of take a step back. It's very easy when you're staring it right in the face to go, oh my God, this is frustrating, or whatever it might be. But we're on the cusp of having a football regulator, independent football regulator, a football governance bill. It will not come quick enough for some people. It does take time, those things to get set up. But this is I'm firmly of the view that this is going to happen, right? It may not have everything, because we know there are bits around the edges, and it will always be some sort of compromise. But once it's there, then things will begin to change, because the stuff that's in the bill has got to have some impact. And then it may well just become self-fulfilling, and clubs get better at things themselves. But I think we have to, it's that sort of perspective a little bit. It's very difficult. I know a club like Reading, where it's every day, it's not about what's on the pitch, it's off the pitch and all of that. It must be, I'm a Crystal Palace fan. I remember it from when we were on our knees about 15 years ago and things like that. Very difficult to lift your head away from that. But actually, this is going to happen. And Fair Game will continue, and Fair Game will continue to campaign for additional things around the edges, and we just got to get it over the line, get the regulator set up, and then watch it do its work. It's just, we have to, with Joanne, sorry, it's the politicians that have to do their bit now, as you have rightly pointed out.
Absolutely.
Well, there we are. An optimistic note to end on. Panel, thank you for your time today, and thank you for listening. If you'd like to hear more discussions on the future of, well, the beautiful game, isn't it? Please do subscribe to the Fair Game podcast. It's available on all the usual channels. I'm Graham Miller. The producer is Ian Beach. And until the next edition of We Love You Football, it's goodbye for now.
Hi, I'm Noah Cooper, the CEO of Fair Game. Fair Game represents 34 men's professional football clubs across the English pyramid, all united by one aim: to deliver and campaign for a fairer future for football. Fair Game has its annual conference on the 28th and 29th of May at AFC Wimbledon. Keep an eye on our social media channels for all the details, and obviously on our website, www.fairgameuk.org. We'll be putting together some workshops to develop realistic solutions to the problems the game faces, and also having stalls bringing together all those that care for football and want to deliver that fairer future we all want.